Good morning, everybody. It's Jeff Goldberg for the Sales Pro Network. It is Friday, February 24th at 10 a.m. Eastern. I founded the Sales Pro Network because I'm a sales trainer and coach, and I wanted to elevate the profession of sales and give salespeople a place where they can come hang out, network, get great coaching and answers to their questions. And as you know, every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, we either do a live training or an interview with somebody who can add value to the profession of sales. And today is no exception. If you're watching us live, please say hello in the comments. If you're watching us live on Facebook and have not connected your account to StreamYard, when you say hello, we're not going to know who you are. It just says Facebook user. So please put your name in there. If you have any questions for our guests today, please put those in the comments too, and I'll make sure that we ask them. And finally, if you're watching us on the replay, please put replay in the comments. And now, with no further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's guest, Charles Bernard. Good morning, Charles.
Good morning, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Great to see you. Charles, you are the founder of Criteria for Criteria for Success. I guess you know what's on my mind this morning.
Yeah, it's a different business.
Okay. Haven't had my fifth cup of coffee. And you're also the host of the Let's Talk Sales podcast. So I want to talk sales with you, my friend. What do you think are, well, actually, before we get started, why don't you give us the 2-minute background and, what brought you to this point? Give us a little bit of your history.
So I started my professional life as a data processing maven. I was a software engineer, systems architect, and I did a lot of work with IBM systems. And when I was at General Electric, I had the opportunity to transition into sales. And since then, which is many years ago, I've retained that technology mindset because I think, especially in today's world, that process technology coupled with the soft skills, the interpersonal skills, is why I combine those two to form the company that I have now, which is a combination, as I describe it, of philosophy and mechanics. So Criteria for Success is a sales consultancy that delivers coaching, training, management consulting, and sales playbooks. And all of that is a combination of philosophy and mechanics.
Got it. So let's talk about selling today. What are some of the top challenges that today's salespeople are facing?
Well, I think along what I was just saying, one of the top challenges is connecting with buyers. And the problems that I think that they're facing is that there are so many different mediums. There is digital, there are all these AI tools, there are all these sequencing, cadences. Phone is kind of down, I would say, at the bottom of the list or very close to the bottom of the list. And I think the biggest challenge is, where does a salesperson, first of all, what do they use? What method, what tool, and then what approach? And I think there's just a lot of confusion, and that's a big challenge.
When you say phone is at the bottom of the list, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think phone is at the bottom of the list as an outreach, like as an initial outreach. I think people aren't answering their phones as much, if at all. And I think phone becomes very helpful, very useful when the buyer on the other end is more trusting of the salesperson, has a legitimate reason to want to talk to them. So I guess phone that does come into the play kind of like as a third or fourth step, but as an initial outreach, I don't think it's effective.
Interesting. I know you work a lot with sales playbooks. You mentioned that when you introduced yourself. I don't know that everybody knows what a sales playbook is. So what is a sales playbook, and what do you see as some of the key trends in sales playbooks?
Great question. So let's start with the technical side. A sales playbook is a platform that lives in the cloud that you want everyone on your team to be able to access. And simply stated, it's the best practices that you have in your organization. So that's a fancy term, so I'll break it down. The easiest way that I think a playbook adds value is it's a knowledge transfer tool. So you've got a combination of seasoned salespeople, not so seasoned salespeople, junior salespeople. If they can collaborate in developing the sales playbook, they have a hand in developing it. Now you've captured a lot of the what we call bridges between the knowledge keepers and the knowledge seekers. So the knowledge keepers are the ones who are performing really well, hitting their numbers, hitting their targets. And the knowledge seekers are the ones who want to become that person. It's like, if I'm on a sales team, I'm watching the top performer probably more closely than anybody else because I want to get there sooner than later. So I think a sales playbook helps you do that.
Got it. So at the company I worked for before I formed my own company, we had an intranet, and there we listed all the success stories by industry. So, if I was going to a meeting with, for example, a bank, I had like 15 banks that we had worked with, and I could use that would that be part of a sales playbook?
That's an awesome example. So we would say, create a library of success stories, train people on using them, telling them, and then augment those success stories with what are the problems those success stories are solving? What questions might you ask to expose those problems? So all of that would be stored in the sales playbook.
Got it. So a sales playbook then is a way to bring people up to speed more quickly,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is every sales manager's desire and every salesperson's desire. How do I make as much money as I possibly can as quickly? And it is challenging, especially when you're new to sales, or if you've had it a few years and maybe you've developed some bad habits. So I know that for me, in every organization, when I was a seller, when I joined a new organization, I looked for who's the best person, who's doing the best job, who's making the most money, closing the most. And I wanted to take that person out to lunch and pick their brain. So a sales playbook is a living document that people can actually do to go pick somebody's brain.
Pick someone's brain, and it might prompt questions like, I see the story. Who's the author of the story? It was Jeff Goldberg, and he's the top performing sales guy. 100%. I would say, hey Jeff, can I pick your brain? Could we go to lunch? Could we set up a Zoom call? Could we do whatever is needed? Because one of the things I found, by and large, good performing salespeople like to get other people to perform because, in a way, it's a motivator for them to continue to up their game.
Yes, it's why taking out a new salesperson on a sales call with you is so good for both, because the new person is learning skills, and the experienced person, if they're doing it right, is on their best behavior. When you get same thing for sales managers, I find. When you've been in sales long enough, you can find some shortcuts to doing things that maybe you didn't need to do it in the beginning because you were brand new and didn't know anything. But those shortcuts don't necessarily translate to new people. So I know I've been a sales manager in positions many times in my life, and I was always on my very best behavior because I'm modeling the behavior that I want the new people to do, not what I can do.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, great.
Sure.
Don Levine, thank you for joining us this morning, Don, our executive recruiter from Long Island. So what are some of the best ways to accelerate sales growth, and how does your company help clients do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a bunch of things that you can do, but one of the things that I like to target right away is shorten the sales cycle. That's going to accelerate growth. Before you get more prospects and you get more deals, if your sales cycle is too long, you're compounding the problem, right? You're getting more people to sell, and that's going to be kind of jamming up the sales cycle. So one of the things we do is we look at, what are your proposals? How much fluff is in your proposals? How can you split your proposal in half so you send two documents? One is the relevant document, what we'll call the proposal, and the other document would be the leave behind. And the problem with very long proposals is that there seems to be an implied request that the buyer reads all of that. And most buyers are stressed out. They don't have enough time in the day. When they see a 30-page document, and even if the calls have gone great, the meetings so far have gone really well, and the buyer wants to buy, they know that they have to understand what's in that proposal in order to sign off. So they're going to put it off. They're not going to read it. They're too busy. And read it later turns into read it never. And then the salesperson is harassing and chasing for a response. Our initial approach is, how do we make the proposal grab the buyer's attention in the first 2 to 3 pages? And the way to do that is to summarize goals, summarize what you need, summarize what you're going to do, and summarize the next steps in numbered bullet format. And so when you get, say, 6 to 8, maybe more bullets in each of those categories, and they're numbered, I now, as a buyer, can kind of digest what's in this proposal. What is it basically? And does it meet my needs? Yes, I can move forward. So things like that is one way that we can help grow sales. And then other things are just like, behavioral, like what's the outreach? If you have a slightly larger team, how is marketing providing marketing qualified leads? You don't want your salespeople just grinding away at sending outreach emails and workflow emails. Let marketing do that. And then when the prospective buyer is interested, now the salesperson can get involved. I think things like that make the sales process more efficient and helps grow sales.
Yeah, I could not agree more about proposals. People are stressed out. They don't have the time. And my experience is when you give somebody a proposal, they turn to the last page immediately. It doesn't matter whether there's 4 pages before it or 50 pages before it. They know what's on the last page. It's the price, and that's where they go. And
That's where they go.
unfortunately, they've missed all the meat of the proposal that's
Right.
supposedly doing the selling for you. It's also why I'm very much against emailing proposals. I want to deliver them in person if at all possible. Now, I'm not going to, get in my car and drive 3 hours to deliver a $500 proposal. But if it's a decent amount of money with a decent amount of profit in there, the best is always to meet with people in person if possible. Is it always possible? Of course not. But I find way too many salespeople and sales managers try to do all their business via email. Great tool, but not necessarily taking the place of a face-to-face meeting when you possibly can.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I also agree with you. Almost every client I've ever worked with in the past and today, they have that same issue you talked about. It's my sales cycle is too long and they just don't know how to shorten it. I mean, to me, the easiest way is to make sure that you're always getting a next meeting. I call it the BNAS, the best next action step philosophy, which says you don't leave a meeting or a phone call without setting up the next meeting or phone call. If you're not doing that, then you're stretching out the sales cycle unnecessarily. And I'd rather find out somebody's not interested sooner rather than later if they're not, or close them sooner than later. I'm not interested in things that stretch on forever. Is there an argument to be made that you can close deals after 4 and 5 years? Sure, I have, and I'm sure you have too. But I'm looking to do it as quickly as possible because the quicker I close you, the quicker I can get on to somebody else.
Absolutely. And the quicker I can disqualify you. Like if it's a no, let's find that out and just move on, right? It's these kind of in-betweens that I think cause a lot of problems and elongate the sales cycle.
Absolutely. Look, I always say yes is my very favorite word in sales, and no is a very, very close second. Everything else blows. It just sucks.
Yeah.
I'm good with no. I'm not here to fight with people. I'm looking to be speaking to enough people so that I don't worry about the no's. And the other thing, and I'm sure you would agree, you've got to know your personal metrics. You've got to know what is your closing ratio. How many no's does it take to get to a yes? Because I'm sure that, like me, because we're in similar businesses, I have people all the time. Oh, Jeff, I close 100%. I close 90%. I'm like, anytime I hear that, I'm like, I should be taking your training then, because I don't close that kind of numbers. So it's going to take a certain, whether it's 30% or 70% or whatever it is, you got to know how many no's to take to get to a yes.
Absolutely.
If there was one thing you could recommend to our listeners who are interested in improving how they sell, what would that one thing be?
I think we have this thing that we say at the very beginning of our engagements, and that is practice discovery-based selling. So if there's one thing that you could change tomorrow or today, is practice discovery-based selling. And I'll define that in a question. Is it better for you to tell your buyers how great you are, or is it better for them to discover how great you are? And the obvious answer is discover. Then the follow-up question I always ask is why. And it's interesting the responses I get, but they tend to fall into categories, right? So the reason why it's more valuable is the buyer owns it. They think they came to the decision versus you having to persuade them. They take responsibility for moving it up the chain because they're invested. So all of those things changes, I think, how you sell. And if you're more focused on the selling side versus the buying side, I think you're missing an opportunity. So I hear these terms, sales enablement and sales process, all of that is kind of out there. You can't change it. I just ask people to shift their mindset to, instead of asking questions to themselves, you wouldn't share this with a buyer, but instead of asking the question, what's needed to make a sale right now, ask the same question, but just flip it. What's needed for the buyer to want to move forward right now? And I think by asking that question, you practice discovery-based selling. You start to see the world through their eyes. Like, maybe I should ask a question. Maybe I should share some information that I haven't that's going to make an impact. So it's less about pushing and more about serving.
Yeah, oh, I love that. Yeah, and I'm going to add in that if the buyer says it, they believe it because they said it. It must be true. If we say it, we're scumbag lying salespeople. Why should they trust us? Now,
Exactly.
I don't think everybody thinks all salespeople are scumbags and liars, but there are enough out there that we do have a bad reputation. And obviously, we have to do everything we can to get past that when we're engaging with a prospect. But there's always that built-in prejudice that salespeople are scumbags and liars, and they'll do anything to reach their hands into your pockets and take your money. So if we can get I'm with you 1,000,000% on this. To me, it's all about the questions. It's not about your brilliant presentation skills, and it's not about your strong closing skills. It's really, can you ask great questions and help people come to the right decision for them? I don't even believe in persuading or talking people into things or convincing. To me, sales is just a conversation or a series of conversations leading to help the other person, in other words, the prospect, choose to do business with you. I don't believe I'm good enough to talk anybody into anything that they don't want, don't need, or can't afford, and I wouldn't want to do that.
Bingo. So that's exactly the best definition.
I'm with you, Charles. The world has definitely changed, since COVID, and clearly we're in a much better place than we were 2 or 3 years ago, when you could not see people at all. There's a lot of talk about, is everybody going back to face-to-face selling? Are we still doing virtual selling? Personally, I'd like to get your opinion. I believe we're never going to get away from virtual selling. I think we're really in a hybrid model. Sometimes it's appropriate to be in person. Sometimes it's appropriate to sell virtually. Do you have any tips for being a better virtual seller? Because it's different than being in face-to-face.
Yeah. That's a question I hear a lot. And I 100% agree with you, Jeff, that it's not going to go back. If anything, it's going to probably be more virtual. And it's simply, I mean, if you look at just one legitimate reason, is that especially if you're a bigger company, the amount of money spent on T&E for some of these companies was off the charts, and they begrudgingly jumped on planes, got into cars, wasted all this travel time, wasted all this expense because it was expected. But I think one of the side benefits of COVID is that the world became more accepting of virtual. And so I think you're right, is happening again. So tips, I think one of the things that I think people don't do enough of when working when running virtual trainings or virtual sales meetings or virtual closing or even discovery calls is preparation. So I think a lot of it drives a lot more best practices of what could you do before the call. Because one thing I have noticed, I'd love to hear your opinion, is, and I hear this all the time, well, the reason I like in person is because I can have a longer meeting and I can control it better and I can maintain the person's attention. And I think that there's some truth to that. In other words, on a Zoom call, you can probably hold someone's attention for 45 minutes. Past that, getting to an hour, you're starting to lose them. Emails popping up, their screen is getting, filled up with messages. So I think it would be great if you could send preparatory work ahead of time so you get the most out of that short amount of time, making it shorter and more focused. For example, send an agenda up front. These are the steps. We'll do some introductions. I'd like to know your goals. I want to spend some time on your challenges. I'd like to understand what your approval process is if it's a first-time buyer. And then I want to talk about our solution at the end because I need to gather that information. That to me is an example of preparing the buyer or the prospect for showing up focused. You might expand on that and say, here's some questions I'm going to ask. Why spend that time on the Zoom call and like spend a lot of time asking questions and getting answers? If you tell people ahead of time, they may even bring someone else to the meeting or get that information from somebody else, so that when they are at the meeting, they don't have to say, oh, that's a great question, I'll get back to you. And now you've like introduced another meeting. So, or a delay. So that's important. And then on the other flip side, after the meeting, I think within 24 hours, being able to send a summary email that's compelling, not salesy, not like you're just trying to put in more features and benefits after the call. If you haven't done it on the call, afterwards, not going to work. So the call summary is kind of like, here's what I heard your goals are. Here's some additional information. Here's what I'm doing. And if we can get a proposal to you that you understand and other stakeholders buy into this process and you have budget, we can move forward. It's just another way of shortening that sales cycle and keeping people focused. So I guess the summary, Jeff, is you can accomplish a lot virtually if you are streamlined and focused. If you're trying to bring an in-person experience to a virtual experience, I think that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I'd like to throw in some I don't know what to call them, maybe the physical side of it. And to me, it's important, have a good camera. If your prospect can't really see you, you're good lighting. If you're in the dark, the camera sucks, your sound is not good, it's going to be distracting. Now, you don't have that in person. So to that extent, I'd rather be face-to-face, but there's such an economy of scale. I mean, instead of flying across the country 6 hours to meet with somebody in California, I'm right here I'm on the other coast and I never have to leave the house. Am I going to be probably way more likely to establish rapport and get people to like me and trust me in person as opposed to virtually or on the phone? Absolutely. I'd rather shake somebody's hand than not, or give them a high elbow or whatever we do in the days of today's contagious world. But it's just such a time saver. And if part of the goal is how do we meet with as many qualified prospects as possible, virtual it's not going away anytime soon, and we better get used to it. I'd like to switch over to another topic I'm pretty passionate about. I think LinkedIn is the salesperson's best friend. If you're not using LinkedIn effectively, you're missing the boat. Excuse me. What are some of the smart selling strategies that you tell people to use when selling on LinkedIn?
So I'm not going to compete with some of the experts because there's a lot of experts out there. So to answer your question through my filter, if you will, I work with salespeople to see how they can generate more leads out of LinkedIn. So I give them a lot of tactical advice. So for example, if you're working with an influencer, so when you're looking to build your pipeline, if you go for the decision maker right away, I think it's more challenging and they're going to be less receptive than if an influencer or someone they trust brought you to that conversation. So therefore, I'm advising salespeople to spend a lot of time with partners and influencers and building your network through LinkedIn, right? And therefore, there's a degree of cooperation. One thing that drives me nuts is when someone says, look through my LinkedIn profile and tell me who you want to be introduced to. And if I know them, I'll be happy. I know they mean well, but the burden to go through 2,000 connections of someone's LinkedIn, it'll take me a week to do that screen by screen. So what I say as a best practice is, can I make a deal with you? How about I send you my network and you send me your network? And the most efficient way to do that is to download your connections to Excel. And if you download your connections to Excel, and if they don't know how to do it, they can do it in Google. It's very easy.
Very easy.
So now I receive someone's network. I can now sort that network, let's say by different criteria. The ones I like I sort by company first. So if I see a lot of connections for the same company, I know two things. Number one, is that a company that's on my target list, or is that a company that I would want to talk to? And more importantly, if I see a lot of connections with that company, there's a good chance that that person knows that connection pretty well because there's a lot of them in the same company. Then what I do is once I've isolated companies, I then do another sort on title. So it might be VPs of sales, which is my thing, or it could be heads of marketing, could be CEOs, whatever your business requires you to sort the title you want to talk to, the function you want to talk to. And now I can reduce that list to a manageable size and copy paste, send it back to the person, say, here are the people I'd like to talk to. Is there anyone in particular? And looking through a list of 20, 30 contacts on Excel is not so difficult. And then I do the same. I say, I'll give you my list. So it's a quid pro quo. I email them. And if they want to do the same thing, is one example of how I like to use LinkedIn. Then I got a guy who taught me a trick, which is if you have someone who provides a similar service, like in my business, in your business, sales training, sales consulting, and someone posts, a competitor of yours posts something, and there were a lot of likes and a lot of follows, well, those people are prospects. It's like, well, if you liked what this guy posted, you might want to like what we post, and here's a link to something similar, is another way to kind of mind share within LinkedIn. So those are two quick off the top of my head practices I like to use.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of content marketing, consistently giving people information that serves them. I get about 30% of my business from LinkedIn, and it's not from me reaching out to people saying, hey, would you like some sales coaching or some sales training? It's they're reaching out to me because they like what they've seen, and people are asking me, hey, can we talk about training my team on this, or can you talk about coaching? So I much prefer when people raise their hand and say, hey, I want you, instead of me calling up and saying, hey, need any training today? I think I do it a little bit more eloquently, but I don't want to do that.
Well, you taught me a lesson. I think I need to do more of that. I don't do enough of that. I like it. We do a lot on our website, but I think putting it in LinkedIn is a good idea, better idea.
Yeah, you have a lot of great content on your website. We're going to give that information at the end, how they can find you. You talk about something else that I'm also passionate about, not surprisingly, storytelling. I'm very big that, in order to be a great salesperson, you've got to be a good storyteller. So how does storytelling work when selling, in your opinion? And what tips do you have for salespeople to be a better storyteller?
Yeah, I'll give you some quickies. I share the same passion. So if you remember what I said earlier about practice discovery-based selling, the best way to do that is to tell a story. Because what I've discovered is that I can tell the same story to 20 different people, and each one of them is interpreting that story to fit their worldview. I don't know their worldview. I know the story. So by telling them the story, I know they're engaged because people love hearing stories. It happened when we were 5 years of age and our parents read us a bedtime story. And so people are more likely to be more receptive to a story than being thrown a whole bunch of features and benefits. That's number one. So it does enable discovery. And an example might be, you're talking about a problem. Can I give you an example? Can I tell you a story about another client, same problem? Here's what we did. Here's the solution. When we talk about storytelling, we say, keep it short. You don't want to do a whole War and Peace story or an encyclopedia, but make sure, so this is my tip, make sure that every story, when you deliver the punchline, has a number, because people will probably tune out when you're telling them the story, but they'll wake up when they hear the number. So an example is, we have a client in Seattle. They're a wealth management firm. We came in, they had this problem. They told us that their sales compensation wasn't driving the right kind of behavior. We came in with the CFS sales compensation planner, and as a result, within the first year, sales went up by 30%. And whenever we tell that story, whenever we use that in a training, we ask people, what do you remember the most about the story? Some people say Seattle, wealth management, but almost everybody says 30%. And in real time, Jeff, when I tell these stories to buyers, they'll kind of tune me out a little bit, and then they'll wake up, they'll go 30%. Wait a minute, back up. What? How did you do that? Can you repeat that? Really? So I recommend that you put a number in every story because that, number one, makes it credible. Obviously, you're not going to make up the number. It's got to be true.
Yes.
It makes it credible, but it also creates that sort of focus point where the buyer is now going to probably ask you, you increased sales by 30%, you decreased expenses by 50%. Can you give me more information? That to me is the holy grail of selling, because no more am I then having to persuade you about anything. You're now asking me to give you the information that I'm looking for as a buyer.
Yeah, I teach the same thing. I call it a verbal reference story, and it's exactly what you said. It's a story about somebody else like you who did business with us and lived happily ever after. And it's key because I don't think most salespeople study brain science, but the way the brain works when you're making a buying decision is we think of the negative first. What if I use Charles Bernard's company? What if I use Jeff Goldberg and it doesn't work out? What if I pay them a bunch of money and sales don't go up? Because that's not good or bad, and it's not right or wrong. It's just the way our brain works. So it's silly for us to wish it to be otherwise. But a verbal reference story, a story selling like you're talking about, helps people go, oh, wait a minute. I was thinking this might not work out, but if it worked out for somebody else like me, like your wealth management firm, maybe it'll work out for me too. So a verbal reference story or story selling helps people come to the right decision for them and get past that fear of making a bad decision, which nobody wants to do. Brilliant. Love that. There's something else I noticed. I always go to people's websites and their LinkedIn profiles to look for things. And there's something that you talk about that I wasn't quite sure what that meant. We all have heard the term features and benefits if we're in sales, but what's a unique feature and why does that matter?
Because I think if you can isolate 20 unique features about your business, number one, everything that follows a unique feature has more credibility. So for example, back in the day, I used to run sales for a systems integration company, and we had a lot of competitors. And so when we were describing features of our business, one thing our buyers wanted to hear a lot about is response time. Like we were running a computer systems and we were putting in networks, we were maintaining them. And so a business's network goes down, they're out of business. So they want a guaranteed response time. Everyone and their brother sells guaranteed response times. They're 2 hour, 4 hour. So how does a buyer test it? How does a buyer know that your guaranteed response time, number one, is real? And number two, how do I understand it? So tell me, like you said, I don't want to make a bad decision. I want to make sure I'm getting educated so that when I pull the trigger on the contract, I'm pretty confident that you're going to deliver. So we never said that. We never said we have a guaranteed response time. We said something that sounded unique. What we said is when people would ask or we would tell them about our response time, we say we have the NetLand escalation response. And we would wait. And most people would say, what does that mean? Which again is the holy grail of selling. If they didn't, I would always default to, do you want to know what that means? And so we would describe how if there was an incident where they needed us quickly, their network was down, they would call a number and we had an escalation tree. Back in the days, we wore beepers before. That tells you, right, how long ago. We didn't have cell phones. So we had an escalation tree. What that meant was that the engineer responsible, the best qualified level 1 person would get a page. There was a time, usually somewhere between 2 to 3 minutes. If that person didn't respond, it went to the next beeper in the tree, another person. And we had like 10 people in the tree, never got that far. And I was at the top of the tree, right? I was the last one, last resort. No engineers. It's July 4th. Charles gets in his car with all the equipment and he is the engineer. So people love that. They were like, wow, never heard anything like that before. So they could literally visualize how that unique feature would apply to them. And then once you have a unique feature, you can build off of that. You can tell stories like I just gave you. You can ask questions to expose problems that unique feature can. So I think it's critical that you start to look at your business as a set of unique offerings versus me too. And even when you do that within your own company, going back to what we said at the very beginning, that exercise, doing it in a group of like, what are our unique features? And when people start to throw in their ideas, there's just a lot of knowledge transfer that's going on to be able to kind of say, yeah, that sounds good. Do you have a story that kind of illustrates that? And do you have, what problem does that feature solve? And what's the benefit of that feature? Gives people a much more subject matter oriented approach than just like, yeah, on-site response. Yeah, we do that. We do that like everybody else.
Yeah, what a great exercise to do in an organization. You know, what makes us different, and that's especially. I mean, look, if people want criteria for success, they've got to get it from you because that's your company. That's what you offer. If they want Jeff Goldberg, they can't get. I mean, you can get sales training from somebody else or sales coaching from somebody else, but you get me. But you know, I've worked, and I'm sure you have too, in many industries where it really is a commodity. I was working with a company; they sell packaging, bubble wrap, and mailers and things like that. But their mailer is no different than anybody else's mailer. So you've got to come up with something, because if you don't, it's all about the price. And
Yeah.
I don't like selling on price.
Bingo. Me neither.
Yeah. You also talk about selling to different personality types. So should we sell the same way to everybody, or do we take into account their particular personality when we're selling?
You just hit on one of the things I'm probably the most passionate about, and that is people process information differently. People bring their head demons. They bring their demons to a meeting. They've been burnt by salespeople, or they're under the gun, or they've had terrible experiences, et cetera, et cetera. So we call them, like, they bring these invisible demons to the meeting. I think if you're unaware of those as a salesperson, you're missing the boat. And so it's really important to kind of sense how your buyer wants to be sold or how your buyer buys. So some people like to process a lot of information. Some people just want pictures. Some people just want to kind of like quick and dirty. Either way, I'm a salesperson armed with, let's say, an encyclopedia of knowledge. And an old coach of mine said to me, back in GE, actually, he said to me when I was at General Electric, he said, know 10 times more than you ever speak. The problem is, which is the 10th you need to speak about with each different person. And what he was saying was, some people can only absorb so much, and you have to understand, you can't just keep hitting them with all this stuff if they're not absorbing. So the bottom line is to be relevant. That's really the thing that I care about the most. Like, how can you be relevant with all this knowledge? So yeah, making sure you know who you're selling to is critical, so you know how to be relevant. And if you don't know, ask. I'd say, is this making sense? Is this something you care about? No, I really don't. Okay, then let's not talk about that. But please let me know if there's something I'm talking about that makes sense or you want me to expand on, because sometimes I might miss it. So that involves the buyer and telling you, tell me more about that, so they don't feel they have to patiently wait you out because they don't want to interrupt you, or they think it's rude to tell you that what you're saying isn't resonating, that kind of thing.
Do you have any techniques or methods for figuring out what type of buyer somebody is? I mean, it's not like we can hand them a disc profile before we meet with them and say, please fill this out so I know whether you're a dominant or something else, a driver.
There actually is. I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it. I think it's maybe Kelly knows, but there's a tool out there that can parse out how people process information, just how they write emails. But obviously that doesn't really answer your question. But if I'm on a Zoom call or I'm in person, it's really hard, Jeff. I think body language says a lot, are people kind of glazing over, wondering. I think I don't really have a quick answer, but I can tell you that frequent checking in, like, I love salespeople who say, does that make sense? Like, I know I'm doing a lot of talking, so could I get some feedback? And that they'll tell you, you can tell by the way they absorb and respond to these questions.
I love checking questions. Are we on the same page? Is this tracking for you?
Is this tracking?
I use those all the time.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's a good way to do it.
I do the same thing when I'm training, by the way, because I always say, it's great that all this knowledge is in here, but unless I can get it out of my mouth and into your brain in a way that you can understand it, you just got ripped off. I'm still getting paid, don't worry. But let's make sure it actually does transfer over. There's another phrase that I came across in your LinkedIn feed, which I've never heard before. What is gravity selling?
So gravity selling is, because we're consultants and we're in a consultative sell, I think when you have a client over time, there's this thing that I think is similar to gravity. Gravity is a weak and constant force. You don't really notice it, but it's there, right? So I think, like gravity, a client will devalue you over time. Let's say you keep invoicing every month. They're going to say, first 3 months, this is great. Maybe after 6 months, they're like, are we getting the value? Like, we're paying this guy so much money, or we're paying this company. What? So gravity starts to introduce those questions. So gravity selling is essentially telling customers and clients what you've done for them in a written form, what you plan to do. So the way we like to do it is, here are our goals for this month. Here are the results. Here's what we plan on accomplishing. Here's what we did. Here's what we didn't do. And giving people the opportunity that you're still working for them and you're still adding value. So in a way, I'm trying to push against that gravity, the gravity being the devaluation mindset.
Makes perfect sense now. Yeah, I find that especially important in my practice when I'm doing coaching, where, quite often salespeople are paying me directly for their coaching, but often it's also the company paying for their coaching. And if I don't check in with whoever the manager is and say, here's what we've been talking about, here's the progress I'm seeing, here's the challenges, then all they see is that check going out each month, or the credit card being out each month. You're absolutely right. And after a while, it's like, what are we getting out of this? Brilliant. You use another term that I'm huge on with my coaching clients: accountability. Why is accountability so important in selling?
Oh my God, how much time do you have?
We've got 18 minutes.
Well, you have a trick and a knack for really getting to some of the things that I care deeply about. And accountability is one where I think there's a lot of confusion, honestly, Jeff. Like, people are saying, I don't have an accountable culture. My salespeople aren't accountable. And I say, I can tell if you have an accountable culture by how you answer these two questions. One, are your people setting goals? Two, more importantly, are they making those goals public, at least public to you? And you might be surprised to hear some people tell me all kinds of crazy things. They'll go, yeah, we tried goal setting. It didn't work. What do you mean? Oh, a lot of pressure. People didn't like it. They didn't like having all that pressure. And I'm like, so let me get this straight. You're not setting goals. Then what are your people focused on? And more importantly, do you know what they're focused on? So accountability is the byproduct of good goal setting. And goal setting is critical, because if I, as a salesperson, set clear goals, and we've heard them, SMART goals, all of that, but I'm not even getting there. I'm talking about, most salespeople don't set goals. That's one discovery I made a number of years ago. Most salespeople are task-oriented, not goal-oriented. So they'll set a weekly goal that says something like, my goal this week is to make 100 phone calls. And then my question is that a goal or is that a task? And then obviously I'm going to ask, what's the outcome of making 100? What's your goal? Get 3 new appointments. Isn't that your goal? And so if you're not trained well, and you're serving you're publishing your goals, meaning I'm your manager and I want to look at everyone's goals, and I see a lot of task-oriented goals, I'm still left with the question, what is my team focused on? But it works both ways, Jeff. In other words, for me to set good goal hygiene and accountability, I want to publish my goals first, because if I, as the department head or the sales manager or the CEO, if they're reporting to me, I say, this quarter, my goals are we get this much money, this much revenue, this many new clients. We open this territory, we sell this new product. I'm laying that out. Then my mandate to my people is I want your goals to align with those goals so that we're all rowing in the same direction. Because you could have goals and they may even be good goals, but if they're out of context and they don't line up with my goals, or worse, they don't line up with the company forecast, then I've got another problem. I don't have the ability to hold them accountable to what matters, because holding you accountable to accomplishing goals in of itself is not sufficient. I need to hold you accountable, or you need to hold yourself accountable to the right goals. It's kind of like what I mean by accountability.
Once again, I could not agree more, Charles. And first of all, I'm not shocked to hear that most salespeople don't have goals. That's my experience too. I'm constantly stunned when I take on a new client or I walk into a new organization. What are the goals? We don't have any. What? That's the very first thing I do with new coaching clients. It's the very first thing we do. We set goals. And I actually co-authored a book on setting and achieving goals. If you've read the book Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, he says we're born with a success mechanism in our brain. In other words, we pop out of the womb born to be successful, but the success mechanism needs something to focus on. What's that thing? It's a goal. Goal-oriented people are simply more successful. There's just no doubt about it. And the accountability piece, I think, is crucial. In the book that I co-authored on setting and achieving goals, it's called How to Be Your Own Coach. So we're teaching people how to coach themselves. But even in a book about coaching yourself to success, we still say you need somebody else to hold you accountable. One of the things I'm not surprised anymore, but your clients are your best source of feedback. They tell you what they like, what they don't like. And I do stand-up comedy on the side. So you know immediately whether a joke goes over or not because the audience is giving you feedback. But your clients are your best source of feedback. And it was very interesting for me because I didn't think this was what was going to be most important to them. But almost to a person, my coaching clients tell me the thing they like best about it is the accountability piece. Because I end every coaching session with them making commitments to me about what they're going to do. Not me telling them what to do. Just getting them to make a commitment, not what they want, not what they're going to try to do, a commitment. That's a word I use a lot. And then I hold them accountable to that on the next call. And almost to a person, they say that's what they like the best. Not the advice I give, not the conversation. It's you hold me accountable so that I know I have to do it. Look, I'm a pretty determined guy. I'm a visual learner, so I have signs in my office. And one of them says, my will is unshakable and my word is law. Except, you know what? I'll break a promise to myself. I won't break a promise to you, Charles, but I'll break one to myself because I love me. So that accountability, I'm with you a gazillion %. That's huge. Something else I'm very passionate about, and I know you are too. What about networking? It's everywhere. And many salespeople I find are just not getting a good bang for their networking buck. How can we be better networkers?
The simple answer, give to get. So, obviously join the right network. It's got to be people that can bring you to where you want to go. But I also think it's really important before you join any network or before you create any kind of personal network, what's your value to the network? Because I think you get a reputation. I've gotten a reputation in the past that I've had to change, that you kind of ask for a lot, but you don't really give a lot. You're always asking for leads, but you're not giving any. So I think a network of influencers is critical. And the bigger my network of influencers, the bigger, obviously, the opportunities to get new business. But oftentimes I'll find if I'm calling on an account and they're ghosting me, or I have a situation where I just can't get to the person I want to get to because I've exhausted, the people in the company I'm working with, I go to my network and I go, does anyone know this person? Or I could even see if they're connected. And influencers can be really, really valuable, but it's a nurturing relationship, right? You got to be able to, you got to get a reputation for where people want to help you. So, I always count, like I've got one person who's literally sent me 3 referrals this month. And I'm like, come rain or shine, I got to give her something back. back to what you were saying about, honoring your word and discipline. I don't want to have a reputation for being a getter and not a giver.
Yeah, absolutely. I would throw in also that if you join a networking group, and I've been in one for 18 years, it provides me about 40% of my business. So I get a bunch from LinkedIn, I get a bunch from my network. It's not about going to the meeting every week or every 2 weeks. Of course, you have to do that, but it's about me and Charles, you and I, Charles, getting together and let's really get to know each other. Because my philosophy on networking and referrals is a little bit different than what I find many people's philosophy is. And the typical person is like, look, Charles, I'm going to make an introduction for you. Don't make me look bad. I go the opposite direction. You better make me, if I'm going to introduce, who am I going to introduce you to? I'm going to introduce you to my clients and my prospects. That's how I feed my family. So you better make me look good. I fully expect, not you in particular, Charles, because I know you would, but anybody, if I make an introduction, I better get a call or an email from the person I introduced you to saying, wow, thank you for introducing me to Charles Bernard. That guy's amazing. Then I know I'm doing the right thing in effective networking.
Yeah. And by the way, just to add to that, I had a guy before I met you, Jeff, so you can't beat me up, who was a competitor. And when we weren't a fit for whatever reason, I would refer that client to my competitor who I knew would do a good job.
Absolutely. The Sandler franchise here on Long Island, where I live.
He happened to be a Sandler guy. Yeah.
I'm friends with him. He's a great guy. He's actually, he and his partner are both excellent at their jobs. They do things slightly different than me. Look, we're pretty much all doing the same thing. We're saying different words, but Sandler, you get to go someplace and be in their offices. I don't do anything like that. I've referred him business multiple times, and he's tried to refer business my ways too. Why not? I have an abundance mentality, Charles. There's plenty of business for all of us. I am competitive though, so if you're making $1 million, I want to make sure I'm making $1.1 million. But there's plenty of business for both of us.
All right, we'll keep that in mind.
Do you have any good advice for busting a slump? Nobody stays at the highest level of production every day for years and years and years. We all go through ups and downs occasionally. Any advice for things that we can do when things aren't going so well for us?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that happens to me a lot. So I get into the summer slump, I get into the vacation slump. So I went on vacation, now I get back, I'm sort of more lazy than before I left, and I get into a slump. Or economic conditions, you name it, there's a million reasons. I think, number one, you got to manage the conversation between your ears. It's like, poor me, what's happening? Or worse, looking for validation as to why things are bad. Like, I used to, when COVID hit and I'm working with CEOs and heads of sales, they would spend an enormous amount of energy telling me the story of why everything's so bad. And I'm like, Jeff, let's not go down that path, because that's going to burn a lot of time and it's not going to make you feel any better, and it's not going to resolve anything because you can't control that. What can you control? So if you want to maintain, so I would say if you're in a slump, go through a bunch of phases. Number one is formulation. That's a very important phase. So form a plan. Before you do anything, form a plan. It goes back to goal setting. I'm going to make this many calls and get this result, and this is my plan, and these are my goals, and this is what I want. That's what we call formulation. Concentration, to me, is the biggest thing. You concentrate more than ever when you're in a slump to execute that plan. For me, I'm not saying everyone should do this, but for me, I get up 2 hours earlier. I make sure I close out my day with any of my incomplete things carried over to the next day, meaning I'm making a lot of notes on paper, lots of notes. But I'm circling things as I'm speaking to Jeff and I'm speaking to other people. But if I don't go back to my notes, that's all history and I forget about it. So I go back to my notes to make sure I'm staying on top of my game. So bottom line, when you're in a slump, get more goal-oriented, get more disciplined, and then start looking at things that you've missed, because I think there's leads right under your nose. An example, every time I've done this, I've generated a minimum of 10 leads. And that is, I take my email and I sort it by sender. I get all the Jeff Goldbergs together and I get all the Joel Rosencrantz's, and all these different people. And I go, oh my God, that's a person I spoke to 3 months ago and I forgot to follow up. Or that's a person I spoke to a while ago. And if I ping them, I'm sure I'll get a conversation. So just mine all that valuable information you have instead of getting into the poor me story or letting that slump overwhelm you.
Yeah, go back through your database.
Go back to
Look,
your
look at
database.
all your old customers. I can't tell you how many times I've given the advice and used the phrase, there's gold in your database. Gold.
Gold.
I'm betting that right now, for everybody who's listening or everybody who'll listen later on the replay, if you go back through your previous customers, at least one or two of them are sitting there waiting for your call. They know they need you. They just haven't picked up the phone yet. Give them a call. I used to have a client that I worked with two different divisions of the same company, and one was upstairs in a building, one was downstairs in a building. Whenever I was upstairs doing training for one, I always made sure to stop down at the other one just to say hi and stick my head in. Can't tell you how many times I would hear, oh, I'm so glad you're here. I've been meaning to call you for a month. I need to arrange some work. Just because I know, would I have gotten that call eventually? Sure, but I want it now. And regarding people who come up with reasons, I'm happy to listen to the reasons, but my response at the end is always the same. Great, those are excellent reasons for not closing deals. However, Citibank is going to come repossess your house at the end of the month because they don't care about your excuses. The leads suck, so what? Marketing's awful, so what? Bad economy, they're going to come take your car. Go make something happen. And you used another term that I can't not comment on, summer slump. Boy, I hate that phrase. I'm guessing that, like me, you probably get calls like March, April. Jeff, summer's coming. I can't sell during the summer. And I always ask, why can't you sell during the summer? And they always have the same excuse. Everybody's on vacation. No, they're not. I mean, did you take a vacation last summer, Charles?
Me, yes, but
how long?
Well, sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's longer, but you're right. People aren't on vacation for 3 months.
No, exactly right. I went on vacation last summer, 8 days. That still leaves 2.5 months that you could have reached me.
Right.
And by the way, while I was in Greece and Rome, I still have this with me. You can still reach me. So that brings us to another topic that we're both passionate about, and I think that's going to be our last question. Head trash. Summer slump, to me, that's just head trash.
Head trash.
So what do you consider head trash, and how can that actually derail our selling?
So head trash is that little voice in your head that right now saying what little voice? That little voice. And the little voice in your head is persistent. It's like gravity we talked about. It is continuous. It doesn't go away. And what my suggestion would be is, and by the way, studies have shown that that little voice is predominantly self-critical. Kind of, it's healthy in a way, but not for selling. That's not healthy. So what I recommend anybody who wants to know about how to deal with head trash, it's really how you don't deal with head trash, meaning just let it go. Like, it's the economy, life sucks, everything's terrible. Thank you, mind, for sharing. And this is what I'm doing. And it goes back to what we've been talking about. It really goes back to really what you think doesn't matter. It's what you do that matters. Are you picking up the phone? Are you going through your database that has those golden leads you talked about? Are you literally setting goals and working those goals and setting a structure that works for you? And whatever you think about that, and whatever you think about the economy, and whatever you think you should or shouldn't do, second guessing yourself is not healthy. Acting in a constructive, disciplined way, I think, is what you need to be focused on.
Yes, inevitably, when I have somebody come to me, I was making a lot of money. I don't know what happened, and we start taking a look. Let's take a look back 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. Inevitably, they stop prospecting. They stop doing the building blocks that make sales happen. Sales don't happen out of nowhere. So if you're not laying the foundation constantly, I consistently say this to people: consistent and effective prospecting of whatever type you're going to do is 50% of selling. If you're not speaking to enough prospects, I don't care how good you are at selling, you're not going to make it. So you always need to go back to the foundations. The other thing I'll add in is, when you are in a slump or when you're having head trash, it's time to talk to somebody else. Sometimes it's hard to talk yourself out of that mental loop that keeps going. And I love what you said about the little voice. Sometimes it's just time to, whether it's a paid coach like you or me, or a friend or an associate, just get out of your own way. Charles, I hate to say this, but we're out of time because I could talk to you all day. I'm going to share my screen right now. Would you tell people how they can reach you if they're interested in chatting with you or possibly
Yeah,
your services?
certainly. Well, first of all, it was a privilege, Jeff. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. I really learned a few things just listening to your approach. But if you want to get in touch with me, there are three best ways. Email's the best. You can get me on LinkedIn, or you can call me or text me at the 917 number.
Okay. Would you like to give out that information? Because this is also going to be turned into a podcast for those who aren't
Sure.
watching live, so they can hear it.
Email is cbernard@criteriaforsuccess.com, all spelled out. If you go to LinkedIn, it's Charles Bernard 1. That's my LinkedIn address. And then my cell is 917-73-3104.
Perfect. Charles, we are out of time. I thank you so much for sharing your brilliance generously. You are a true expert. And I will end, as I always do, by saying this. Gang, sales is a game of making things happen. So get out there and make sales happen. Have a great weekend, everybody. Have a great weekend, Charles. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.